Well, welcome to Law Talk, my friends. Law Talk is brought to you today by the Falvello Law Firm. Your case is our fight. They've been around since 1923, my friends. They may know a little bit about the law. My guest today is attorney Conrad Falvello. No stranger. Remember, Connie was on Law Talk for many, many years. How many years was it, Connie?
Sam, I think we did the show for about 12 years.
12 years.
Yeah, it was,
all that knowledge,
good.
all that legal knowledge you gave up
I
there.
still got it.
I mentioned something about, since 1923.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about that history there.
Well, the family history is that the firm was started in 1923 by my grandfather, my namesake, or I'm his namesake, Conrad. He and his brother Rex became lawyers. His other brother James became a dentist in downtown Hazleton for many years. They were Jim was in, the dentist was in the Capitol building on Broad Street, and my grandfather and his brother Rex were in the Hazleton National building for many years. And that's when they started. But the three of them grew up at United Charities. That's where they grew up in the home there, and self-taught, self-educated. Started their own practice. Then they serviced the Hazleton community, and in large part served the Italian immigrant population because both of them could speak Italian.
Was that right?
And so did my Uncle Jim, the dentist. Yeah. So that's how they started.
Now, your grandfather, Johnny and I were just starting off. We were at Towers, and this had to be 1964, 65. I'm coming out of the thing, and your grandfather at that time of day used to go for lunch at 12 o'clock, and he's standing outside, and I guess I don't know who he was standing with, maybe his brother. But he said, you're a pretty smart young gentleman. I knew right off the bat the guy was a genius when he said that to me. He said, if you ever want a good lawyer, he said, I want you to go up to that and see my son, Tony, okay? And I'll never forget that. And I said, well, thank you very much. He was such a nice person. And he had he had a demeanor like you, Connie, a nice demeanor, which is important,
Yeah, my grandfather was very intelligent, very soft-spoken, as was my dad. And my dad came into practice in 1953, and he went in the Hazleton National Bank building at that time with my Uncle Rex and my grandfather. And then not long after that, Henry Giuliani came in with them. So it was the four of them there. And eventually the firm, my grandfather, or Uncle Rex, passed in 1961, and my grandfather in 1967. And then Henry and my dad got together with Joe Ustinowski and Dick Bernstein. So they had the firm when I started practice in 1974. And in 1978, my father and I moved from downtown Hazleton to Butler Drive in Sugarloaf Township, and then we've been in Sugarloaf Township ever since.
Then your daughter gets into the picture.
Yes, my daughter Alexis. She spent 7 years in the district attorney's office, and we can talk about that a little bit. But she came in with the firm full time about 7, 8 years ago, after her time in the DA's, and in the end of 2016, she took over the firm because I spent 2 years working for Congressman Barletta after that, and then came back to the firm in 2019.
What does that mean in terms of that experience? Because you're talking over 100 years, close to 100 years.
We're talking right on 100 years almost. I think first and foremost, Sam, it's part of as a family and as a profession, as our practice, our commitment to the Hazleton community, because we've been here that long. We've started from scratch in 1923 with my grandfather, and We've continued that now with my daughter. It's the fourth generation to be practicing law in Hazleton. We're not a Philadelphia firm who came here or a Wilkes-Barre firm who came here. We're a Hazleton firm. We're a Hazleton area firm. We've serviced the Hazleton area that entire time, and we still do. Now, have we had cases elsewhere? Sure we have, but our hometown is Hazleton, and that's where we've been, and that's where we intend to stay.
Alexa's coming in, she couldn't be here today because there was a meeting, but what does that mean to the general viewer out there,
I would think from the perspective of a client or someone here who's looking for an attorney, I think it demonstrates stability. I think it demonstrates capability and talent that we've had the ability and the talent to be here that long and to be successful for that long in what we do, because we're a limited practice firm. We only do certain things. We do that because it's our feeling that instead of trying to be everything to everybody, we like to focus on particular areas of the law that we believe we do very well, and I think we do. And those areas primarily are personal injury. We also do estates and wills, and over the years I've done some real estate. Real estate is very integrated, if you will, into estate work, because a lot of times people, if they pass, they have real estate that has to be sold, so that's real estate work, and that's what we do primarily. I would say probably 70% of our casework is personal injury. The rest is either estates or perhaps real estate. I do some corporate work. I've done all types of litigation, from zoning litigation to insurance litigation to even some eminent domain litigation over the years, but there's not much call for that these days. So, but primarily it's personal injury and estates.
What should you look for when you're looking to, whatever, if you're injured or if an accident or something happened, fall at work, or wills and estates? I mean, like, what should you be looking for?
Sam, I think that, and I've said this for years, 4 things: experience, track record, the resources that you have available that you can bring to bear to whatever your client needs. And a good example of that would be expert witnesses. So experience, track record, the resources, they're very important, and of course the results. What you can do for your client. And just to give you an example, both Alexis and I are what they call million-dollar advocates. I happen to be a multi-million-dollar advocate. I'm a lifetime member of that association.
What does that mean?
Well, what that means, Sam, is you can see there are different groups, national lawyers, super lawyers, groups like that, where other lawyers recommend you to be in that group. Million-dollar advocate means that we have actually handled cases that resulted in $1 million or more recovery for our clients, or in my case, multiple millions recovered for our clients. It's objectively based on results, not on a recommendation from another lawyer. It is based on results, and Alexis and I, very proud of what we've been able to accomplish in that regard.
All right, so a person gets in an accident. Someone hits them or they hit somebody. What do they do?
If the accident is not the fault of what I'll call the victim, okay, the victim is someone who's not at fault and is injured in the accident. Could be a minor injury, could be a major injury. They should get advice right away. Because there are multiple levels to what needs to be done in that case. Because in Pennsylvania, first of all, you have your own car insurance. So you may be going to your own car insurance for your medical bills. That's the no-fault part. You want to find out if the at-fault party, do they have insurance? They're required to carry insurance to get registration for their vehicle in Pennsylvania. But Sam, oftentimes you have drivers who pay their insurance to get their registration, and then they allow the insurance to lapse because they don't pay their monthly or quarterly premiums, so they don't have insurance. And that's important because you want to look at your own policy. Do you have protection for that? And that's called uninsured motorist coverage or underinsured motorist coverage for people who don't have enough insurance. So there's many pieces and many layers to an injury accident, and that's why it's important for them to get legal advice as soon as possible.
Looking at that, and we've talked about this many times about tort, okay, and why it is so very important for someone to look at their insurance policy as to what they have. All right? Mm-hmm. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes. I think what you're talking about is the selection that all of us who own a vehicle in Pennsylvania have to make when we choose our auto insurance. And that is, do we want full tort or limited tort? Without question, I don't think this is even a subject for debate, in my opinion. You choose full tort because when you choose limited tort, you are giving up a lot of rights that you may not realize you're giving up. Because it's hard to understand, what is limited tort? You have to have a serious injury. Well, serious injury is a very subjective definition. If you have full tort, it doesn't even come into play. Not even an issue.
And the interesting thing is, a friend of mine last year had an ad on our news station looking for help, and 25 people applied. Okay, drove to his place. Right. Now you're not going to believe this. Guess how many of them had licenses? 5.
5 of 25.
5 of 25. Now, God forbid any one of those people who do not have a license, didn't have insurance, slam into somebody, okay? That's where I think it's, where you really have to be concerned.
Yeah, and that part, Sam, is the uninsured motorist coverage and or underinsured motorist that you can buy for your own policy. Protects you and your family from that eventuality, okay? It's a very hard thing to do, to tell a client who comes in and needs advice and say, well, you rejected uninsured and underinsured, and the person that hurt you had no insurance. Very little you can do to help them.
Yeah, that's sad. Folks, I'm talking to attorney Conrad Falvello, sponsor of Law Talk, the Falvello Law firm. Your case is our fight. Their website, falvellolaw.com. A lot of information's on there. We come back, we'll talk about additional things. What actually happens when you're if you're suing somebody or if you fall? When he talked about expert witnesses and resources, what does that mean? We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Law Talk, my friends, brought to you by the Falvello Law firm, 570-788-4191. You can watch all of our shows on ssptv.com 24/7 and our YouTube channel, as well as this show, Law Talk. Connie, you're talking about, just like behind the scenes, all right? Take me behind the scenes, okay? So someone's in an accident, you said about, or someone falls, and they want to sue, etc. What takes place in the lawyer's office then? When we come to you and say, look, this is what happened, what do you do in terms of research and, so you don't have a frivolous lawsuit, okay?
Yeah. Sam, the most important thing is to get advice right away. And I'll give you a good example. Alexis just resolved this case for a good amount of money, but there were multiple people in a multiple collision accident. And in fact, as it turns out, there were 2 accidents. There was one accident, and then another car came along, and another collision caused more injuries to multiple people. To unravel that, as you might suspect, takes some work. And the first thing that was done was our investigator we got right on it, but we got the call right away. So we were able to do it. And the investigator identified for us the individuals involved in one collision. And in this particular case, it turns out that the police didn't have all the information. Our investigator actually got additional information that actually proved a second collision and a second at-fault driver. Well, why is that important? Well, that brought into play the insurance coverage for the second driver. And what we talked about earlier, just a few moments ago, the first at-fault party did not have sufficient insurance to financially cover the injuries of all the people that were injured, that were hurt. The second driver brought into play more opportunity for these victims to be compensated for the injuries that were not their fault. So contacting an attorney immediately is important. The attorney getting the investigator, if necessary, involved is also important to identify the at-fault parties, get pictures of the vehicles, find out the disposition of the vehicles. Have they been, insurance companies will take them to salvage yards. You want to get them at least pictures of the vehicles before the cars are salvaged and sold, in order to what we call reconstruct what happened. And in this particular case, Alexis got an accident reconstructionist involved, reconstructed the accident, and pretty much nailed everything down that we needed to know about who was at fault and how, so that we could move on and convince the insurance companies that they were exposed here. And ultimately they paid, both companies.
So there's a lot that's involved.
Yes,
Okay,
it could be.
Yeah, and that, I guess the time period, because since someone knows that someone else is at fault, okay, they want these things resolved fast, but there's a process that you have to go through.
There is. Some are resolved quickly, but most are not. And the reason is that, as you might suspect, the at-fault party's insurance company is very reluctant just to hand out money. Any insurance company, even your own insurance company,
Yes.
is reluctant to hand out money.
Yes.
So they need to be convinced that they're exposed. They need to be convinced that if they don't do the right thing according to their insurance contract to protect their insured, whether it's the at-fault party or the injured party, they won't pay.
You know, it's interesting, Connie. You know, you buy insurance and you're paying a premium for that, and you know you're so right, because it's sometimes when you're dealing with an insurance company, adjusters, etc. It's difficult because you know that your car was such and such before the accident, or you were in good health, but now you're not feeling as well, and they. I don't want to say they try to play games with that person, but that's where I think you need a seasoned lawyer to be able to say, wait a minute, this is where it's at. You know where I'm coming from here?
Yes, and that's correct. I mean, the insurance companies, they have to be mindful of the adjusters and the regional claims managers. They have to be mindful and answer to their bosses who look at the bottom line, their bean counters, as I sometimes call them, and ultimately they're stockholders if they're a stock company. So they are reluctant and they are cautious, and that's why they need to be convinced. And you can't do that if you don't do your homework. And the other piece of that, Sam, is you need to do the investigation, as I call it, the homework, so that you can properly advise your client. What are the strong components of the case? Are there any weak spots? What do you have to do? For example, sometimes we'll have a client, they may be reluctant to follow through with their doctor's instructions or follow their doctor's treatment recommendations. Well, we strongly recommend that whatever the doctor tells them to do, they should do. It's in their own best interest medically, but it makes it more difficult for an advocate like us to talk to an insurance company when we see medical records, for example, that a client will miss 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 doctor appointments in a row, because then the adjuster says, well, geez, he or she didn't go to 7 appointments. Don't tell me they're seriously hurt. So there are a lot of pieces that have to be addressed, and you have to pay attention.
How do you know when you have to say, Mr. Lasan, I'm sorry, I cannot take this case? How do you know that?
Well, first, what we call the liability or fault, that's the first thing we look at. How did the accident happen? Who was at fault? Pennsylvania has what we call a comparative negligence state. That means that it's not 100% either way. So that means, Sam, if there's an accident and let's say one party can be determined to be 20% at fault and the other party 80% at fault, well, you could still, if you represent the person 20% at fault, you can still prosecute their case, because unless they're more than 50% at fault, they still have a claim. Okay, 51% they have no claim. So that's why they call it comparative negligence. And ultimately, you look at who was at fault and how much were they at fault. So that's part of the determination. The other part is, how were they hurt? Did they in fact sustain an injury as a result of the collision, as a result of the accident? That's called causation. So we look at those. Those two are the most important. Particularly so, Sam, when you get into other types of cases, like a medical malpractice case, which we've had. You look at fault. Was there a breach in the standard of care? Was the hospital or physician, were they negligent, if you will? But in many cases, due to an individual's medical condition in the first place, they may have, a treating physician may have missed something, but it didn't cause harm. And that's the causation issue.
So here again, it boils down to the experience that you have and knowing what to do and where to go. Folks, Connie Falvello, FalvelloLawFirm.com. If you have any questions that you'd like me to ask Attorney Falvello, my email is sam@ssptv.com. We'll be, the next show, we'll be more than happy to ask those questions. Connie, it's nice to have you back on Law Talk.
Thanks, Sam. It's a pleasure.
Okay.
Pleasure.
And hopefully we'll see Alexis next time. She's a busy girl, I'll tell you.
Yeah, she is. Yeah.
That means you're doing a good job.
Well, I like to think so. I'm proud of her.
Folks, we'll see you next time on Law Talk.